Hello, everybody, and my name is Fernando Trujillo, and I have the honor of being one of the organizers of this conference, Knowledge at the Border, together with Professor Beatriz Cortina. And today I will be introducing you and presenting this plenary lecture titled Global Teacher Education, a New Teacher Paradigm for a New World, which we have designed together, Professor Beatriz Cortina from the University of Granada and myself. First of all, I want to thank you for your attention and for your willingness to participate in this conference. This plenary lecture will summarize some of the key points of an Erasmus Plus European project called Gathered Global Teacher Education. In this project, we have been working together with the objective of improving teachers' competence in diversity and global education, particularly in multilingual and multicultural contexts. Both Professor Beatriz Cortina and myself work at the Faculty of Education, Economy and Technology of Ceuta, University of Granada, and this faculty is located in Ceuta, a very interesting border city on the northern tip of Africa. It's an European city on the northern tip of Africa. And in this project, in Gathered Project, we have been working together. Three of us have been working together. Dr. Natalia Martinez Leon from the University of Granada and Professor Beatriz Cortina and myself. The expected results of this Gathered Project is a conceptual framework on global education, a toolkit which we hope will be useful and interesting for educators all around the world, a collection of good practices, resources, and websites that may help them teach in global contexts and in the multilingual and multicultural situations, and an edX course, a massive online open course in which we would like to help teachers to develop competencies to work in this sort of contexts. So let's start with this plenary lecture. I think it's quite obvious that we live in a time of fuzzy and twisted questions with many possible and open answers. Economical crisis, technological advancements, ecological hazards are moving us to think in more complex terms and facing reality with a more complex mindset. And the question that all educators must ask themselves is, what are we here for? Which is our role at schools? And the answer is quite obvious. We are here to help our students learn more, better, and deeper. The fact is that from the 60s, the Coleman Report taught us that socioeconomic factors may determine social achievement and that the school may be unable to counteract the impact of these factors. And so, even though from the 60s we have this type of knowledge, we must also find ways to counteract, to resist this determining influence of socio-economic factors. This may not be the end of inclusive education. Education, as in the Incheon Declaration from 2015, we declared and signed, education is a public good, a fundamental human right, and the basis for guaranteeing the realization of all other rights. And so education is occurring an ethical activity. And in fact, all pedagogical, methodological, organizational possible issues, all technical issues in the educating activity are subordinated to ethics. So inclusion and moving beyond this Coleman report conclusion is an ethical compromise, is a way of proving our commitment to real education. So ethics precedes action, and it also precedes methodology. So the question is, how can we teach despite the Coleman report? And in order to solve this question, we must widen the number and the typology of questions we ask ourselves at school. First of all, what does learning and teaching mean nowadays? Secondly, who learns? Who teaches? Where does teaching and learning take place? Which are the main objectives of the learning activity? What is the curriculum nowadays? Which curriculum? Whose curriculum? Which are the main objectives of the learning activity? These are the real questions we must ask if we want to talk about a global education. Let's start with some quotes for inspiration. First of all, we strongly believe with John Dewey that education is a process of living and not a preparation for future living. Our students' lives are not interrupted by school time. They are living as they are at school with us. And so we must make for them education a real process of living and not just a preparation for their adult life. Secondly, education needs to aim to do more than prepare young people for the world of work. It needs to equip students with the skills they need to become active, responsible, and engaged citizens. So it's not just a question of preparing the workforce of the future. It's a question of preparing the citizenship of the future. And finally, a third quotation, a third reference. In the digital world, we learn by doing, by watching, and by experiencing. And we do not strictly learn by being told about. It's not just an activity of learning, is not just a listening activity or a note-taking activity. It's an activity which we perform by doing, watching, and experiencing. In fact, according to Gert Wiester, there are three domains of educational purpose. The first one is called by him subjectification. The learners build up their identity. They become subjects of initiative and responsibility rather than objects of the actions of others. Secondly, the purpose of qualification, in which the transmission and acquisition of knowledge, skills and dispositions is involved. And thirdly, the purpose of socialization, in which the construction of identity and oneself's location in relation to traditions and social practices is the focus. So, how can we promote subjectification, qualification, and socialization in a school context in the 21st century? Well, in fact, that is the question. What type of teaching do we need to make this type of learning really true? Well, our answer is global education, which implies that teachers become not only educational designers as they have always been, but also committed citizens and active nodes in knowledge networks. So the global teacher is a revision of the traditional role and identity of the teacher, which involves these three facets, these three new roles of the teacher. So global teacher has several meanings. First of all, it relates to global education for the whole child, not just their cognitive capacity, and also to inclusive education, which means education for all children, no matter their origin or their capacities. Secondly, global means to include an axiological perspective together with theoretical or technical or methodological approaches to teaching and teaching education and development. And thirdly, global also means international. It means a wide perspective to the education and to teaching. And in order to define what global education means, we must understand that there are some common foundations for global education and global teaching, but with different expressions in different contexts. For us, the global teacher is an educator which is a citizen, and that is their first identity, citizen identity, who have the capacity to generate learning experiences. This is the second identity of the global teacher, the teacher identity, in contact with other individuals and groups. And this is the third identity of the global teacher, connector identity. So the global teacher has three identities in function at play: citizen identity, teacher identity, and connector identity. The citizen identity involves lifelong learning, committed citizenship, and also fundamental technological literacy. The teacher identity implies design, facilitation, and evaluation. And finally, the connector identity involves leadership, collaboration, and mentoring. So each identity of the global teacher plays a series of essential roles which allow the deployment of different functions in global education. For example, the citizen identity means being part of a learning community, working for their own professional development, and implementing that lifelong learning at their own schools and classroom situations. It means active citizenship. It means working for the common health and the maintenance and the welfare of our environment. It means to be familiar, to know, to be a deep, to have a deep knowledge of the political and curricular framework. And it also means to have a robust technological literacy and to be aware of the means to keep our students' identity and safe, and to work for their privacy and secure use of technology. So this is the story of an evolution. We were working in the paradigm of service provision. We thought that the student was a client who needed some contents, and we were there to provide these contents to the client, with providing them with a service to satisfy their needs. And these needs were broken down and turned into tiny pills called subject matters, and then lessons, and then learning or teaching units. But each pill was independent from all others and from our students' lives. And they were taken individualistically, because the pills were designed apparently for each student, even though all pills contained the same ingredients. And teachers were the only people allowed to create and manage pills, or sometimes textbook publishers too. But this new global education we are working for is located in a different paradigm, the paradigm of experiences. In this new paradigm, we are not mere content providers. We really need a new way of thinking about learning, even a new vocabulary for education. As new year is describes all learning implies the integration of two very different processes, namely, first of all, an external interaction process between the learner and their social, cultural, and material environment, and then an internal psychological process of elaboration and acquisition. So, learning means to change as a consequence of participating in a situation. And this experience allows us to acquire new knowledge or develop new skills. So, teachers are the designers of this learning situation. And learning aims at gaining social and cultural capital to face new personal challenges. So, the new vocabulary of global education starts with affordances, all the possible resources and actions we can make to start the learning process, and then thinking about how to move our students to invest their time, their effort, their resources into the learning situation. And this learning situation is based on the assets and also the constraints we have in a given situation. And the objective of the teacher in that situation is to provoke the student's agency, which finally generates their learning. So, new questions for the global education. The first one is about ownership. Does the learner own the learning activity, which provokes its investment, their investment in it? Secondly, can learners make sense of the learning experience in the light of their own knowledge, beliefs, and experiences, and the situation in which they find themselves? And thirdly, does the learning situation and activity allow creation or intervention in our environment? Because in fact, it is agency, that is, the capacity of people to act upon, influence, and transform their activities and circumstances, which make learning start. It is agency, the starting point of learning in the 21st century, not listening. Agency, the capacity to act upon, influence, and transform our environment. And this is more professionally, more efficiently developed using those methodological and pedagogical resources that we have in our knowledge and competencies as global teachers. Basically, project-based learning, multiliteracies, and universal design for learning. The question is quite clear. When you were younger, did you prefer training or playing the whole game? In fact, training was just a preparation for the whole game. However, at school, on many occasions, we have kept our students stopped on the training moment and never moved into playing the whole game. And playing the whole game in a school situation, in a learning situation, means some kind of inquiry or performance in a broad sense, as David Perkins explained in this book, Making Learning Whole. It involves problem solving, it involves explanation, argument, evidence, strategy, skill, craft, and often something gets created, a solution or an image, a story, an essay, a model. So these are the foundations of project-based learning, which puts together some tasks to obtain a really interesting final product from the perspective of our students. This is a sequence of project-based learning. A first phase in which engagement is the focus to keep our students engaged to the learning situation, in which some sort of challenge is induced to make them be aware of a certain problem, a question, something which must be solved. And then the cycle of planning and producing starts, and this cycle involves searching for and managing information. It involves knowledge building and skill development, and finally the creation of the final product. After this, the project is closed, is wrapped up, and it is disseminated for other students or the general public to know what the students have been doing and working about and learning about. So the challenge is the starting point, and our questions there are: is this project really relevant to the learner? Does it promote ownership, sense making, and agency? And then when we come to planning, the questions are: how will they face the challenge? What do they need to learn? And that question is to be done, to be asked by the teachers and also by the students themselves. And during the implementation is a moment for process monitoring, to keep in contact with the project and be aware if it is moving forward or if any problem is appearing. And this is in fact the objective of learning assessment, to keep the project moving ahead, moving forward. And then during the closure, it's a moment for the final product presentation and also for the celebration of the time that we have been working together and the results that we may have obtained. And the dissemination is also an opportunity for self-assessment and co-assessment. In order to design these projects for global education, we suggest using the canvas designed by ourselves, by Conecta 13, which you may find at that URL. This canvas is designed with Creative Commons license, and you can download it and modify it according to your needs. And together with project-based learning in a multilingual and multicultural context, we also need to have a perspective on three very important concepts: translanguaging, trans-semiotizing, and multiliteracies. These are absolutely necessary elements for experiential learning in a school context, in this multilingual and multicultural context. Translanguaging and trans-semiotizing is a naturally occurring human phenomenon that constitutes the thinking and meaning-making processes of interactional participants. And translanguaging and trans-semiotizing are two basic processes at border context. Because in fact, translanguaging is not limited to the linguistic sphere. It is a semiotic concept which involves the student's whole communicative repertoire. It involves the student's whole identity. And the notion of trans-semiotizing somehow broadens the focus that we have to analyze language as entangled with many other semiotic systems in meaning making. So in multilingual and multicultural contexts, translanguaging and trans-semiotizing are really the normal thing to do, are the normal communicative process. We move this to a classroom context through digital artifacts. In 2014, we made a research in which we tried to establish which digital artifacts might be created in a classroom situation, also to promote universal design for learning. That is, to use different types of representation, different types of means of expression, and also to provoke a deep engagement of the student with the tasks of the project. And we analyzed how to create tutorials, ebooks, presentations, podcasts, e-posters, videos, animations, mind maps, timelines, augmented reality, geotagging, wiki presentations, podcasts, infographies, mind maps, timelines, or comics. The creation of digital artifacts also represent for the final product of a project a very interesting target concerning our students' digital lives. But we must use engaging and inclusive methodologies in order to be sure that we are working for all our students and not leaving aside any single student in our classroom. So technology can really amplify great teaching, but great technology cannot replace poor teaching. In schools, as well as in other organizations, technology often increases the efficiency of already efficient processes our teachers normally implement, but it may also make inefficient processes even more so. So, in conclusion, the key is still to know what learning experiences we want to design and how we are going to facilitate our students' learning and how we are going to assess it. So, in the 21st century, keeping up a reasonable experimental optimism together with a skeptical and evidence-based approach can allow us to move forward without falling into the mousetrap of pessimism. I really hope that global education and this new paradigm of global teaching may help us make up and build the best possible future. There is not just one future, but many possible futures. It depends on our present actions, which future will become reality. So the future is open, and I hope that we will be able to imagine the best possible future for all of us. Thanks and enjoy the conference.